Biblical theology teaches, look, there's lots of Elohim, members of the heavenly host, if that's more comfortable. There's lots of Elohim, but only one of them is Yahweh. I believe that there is one unique, deity called Yahweh.
Yes.
All right. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, is, I like to use the phrase species unique. Other than sort of biblical theology helping us to map this thought over to another thought, I think it really helps with apologetics too. And I'll give you an example, like with Mormonism. If you can look me in the eye and say that you are depending exclusively on what Jesus did on the cross, separated from any merit of your own for any reason, if that is your faith, then you're a believer. You're going to have eternal life. The care of Elohim Yishpot. In the midst of the Elohim, he passes judgment. We're sort of trained either by Hollywood or maybe school or something like that, that you have these groups of deities that are more or less, maybe not completely interchangeable, but kind of interchangeable, and they behave like people. They behave just as badly, and they, it's like a boardroom where they go in there and have knockdown, drag out fights, and then somebody wins, somebody loses, and then somebody schemes behind the other one's back and all that. That isn't the picture of what you get in Psalm 82. What you have in Psalm 82 is God is presiding over a meeting. That's what the text says. And the other people in the room, they're not really people, they're Elohim, so we go from the sort of the CEO boardroom meeting to the heavenly boardroom meeting where it's God and these other Elohim. And what troubles us about that language is the fact that you have Elohim in the plural.
Okay.
And we're just used to thinking Elohim, that's another name for God. And it is, thousands of times, but there are passages like this one's not the only one, where you have it very clearly plural. And we know it's not members of the Trinity, because in verses 2-5, God, the one who's holding the meeting, is just raking them over the coals for their corruption.
Yes.
So we're talking about other supernatural beings here. And the key point is that, look, we have to sort of kind of get out of our little modern, box, and the terminology that we're used to, and just sort of look at the text for what it says, and then ask ourselves a question like, well, how do biblical writers, think about this term? Because they're using it in the plural, right? In the same verse with the big one, the most, the unique one, the most, the most high. And that's an important term, because if you keep reading the Psalm, you hear that term. So God is addressing this other group of Elohim, and he refers to them as sons of the Most High. So these are sons of God. And that's
so he created.
Right. He is their master. He created them. Sons of God is actually probably a more familiar term, because we get sons of God in Job 1 and 2. We get the sons of God, the heavenly sons of God in Job 38. I mean, there are a number of these passages where we know that sons of God is just a term that would be used for like members of the heavenly host. And frankly, that's all that Elohim are. It's just, it shocks us to see that the God term used in the plural. If you actually do something boring, and this is the kind of thing you do in grad school, you concord all the places where Elohim shows up in the text. There's only a few thousand of the place. But if you do that, you see that the biblical writers will use Elohim of 5 or 6 different things that are not the God of the Bible.
Okay.
Now that's important for a really simple reason. And here's why we get creeped out about this. We are used to, when we see the letters G, O, and D on a piece of paper, on a screen, our brain just sort of defaults to, G, O, and D, that refers to a being that has this list of attributes. They're unique: omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, eternality, creation, providence, all this stuff. And so our brain just sort of defaults to those letters, G, O, and D, mean those things. Okay, that is not the way a biblical writer thought about Elohim. And we know that because they use Elohim of things that are not the God of Israel. So that alone tells you that, okay, there's something else going on here, because they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that if it meant attributes. And all it really means is that a biblical writer would use a term like Elohim of a group or an entity that wasn't the God of Israel, just to telegraph the point that this being is a member of the supernatural world. He's one of the heavenly hosts, or maybe he's one of the bad guys in rebellion. if you're an Elohim, you sort of, that's like your address now. You live in the spiritual world. And since you live in the spiritual world, that's what we call you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a term like ruach or ruchot, spirit, spirits. These are spirit beings. We see other divine council scenes, 1 Kings 22, where they're called spirits.
Yeah.
This is all the term means. So, you know, we're okay to acknowledge, this is going to sound goofy, but we're safe acknowledging what the text actually says.
Whoa. That's a crazy.
You know, it has Elohim in the plural. And we don't need to get creeped out about that, because they are not the God of Israel. They're just members of the heavenly host.
Yeah.
So in verse 6, when God is, you know, he's just got done charging them with how wicked they are and how corrupt they are. He says, look, I said to all of you, and it's plural, you're sons of the Most High, but you're going to die like men because of what you've done. Now, a lot of people think that they because they're creeped out, they try to come up with alternative explanations. Well, the gods here are just men, or they're Jewish elders, or Jewish leaders.
Why would someone do that?
Because they think that if we say that there are plural Elohim, now monotheism just goes out the window.
So I guarantee people watching, if you ask them, are you monotheistic?
You're right. Right.
I don't know what the percentage would be, but it would be pretty high.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And because we've been trained, there's one God. And
there is only one of those.
Yes. One Most High.
Right. But there are lots of Elohim. So right away, even in this little exchange, we can see that we have a terminology problem.
Yes.
Because what we've done is we've taken a 17th century term. That's when monotheism enters the lexicon in English. And we're using a 17th century term to describe what an ancient person thought.
Okay.
So we've got a fundamental problem. Now, you know, I believe that there is one unique, you know, deity called Yahweh.
Yes.
All right. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, is, I like to use the phrase, species unique. There really is none like him.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's not a first amongst equals.
He's not the first amongst equals. He's not, you know, just sort of one of many that are sort of interchangeable parts. Okay, that is not what biblical theology teaches. Biblical theology teaches, look, there's lots of Elohim, members of the heavenly host, if that's more comfortable. There's lots of Elohim, but only one of them is Yahweh. Yeah. Only one of them is the creator, is omnipotent, is omniscient, all these things that we're used to. It's just that our vocabulary for expressing that idea actually gets in the way of the biblical text. When we encounter like plural Elohim here, we don't know what to do with it. So we have people, commentators. I mean, I could take you to commentators. Oh, the gods here are just men. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because again, if you go down to verse 6, they're sons of the Most High, which are sons of God. There's only one Most High. We know who that is. It's not a brain teaser. So there's sons of God. And then if you go to Psalm 89, you have the sons of God there in a council, just like Psalm 82, but it's in the skies. It's in the heavenlies.
Okay.
And you don't have a bunch of Jewish leaders, you know, rooting from the skies. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But people don't probe it, you know, that far. They either react to it because of the whole monotheism thing, and it's like, look, I understand it. I was there for many years until I got confronted with the text. And so what I say now is, look, our vocabulary is not adequate for this. A term like monotheism, because when we hear it, we think that means only one Elohim exists.
Yes.
That is inadequate, because the scripture says otherwise. Monotheism is confusing because we define it as meaning only one, you know, Elohim exists. That is not the case according to scripture. So that one doesn't really work. Henotheism is a little bit more descriptive, but the problem with henotheism is that in henotheistic systems, the deity that is judged to be the best might not be the best tomorrow. In other words, he
can get voted off.
He can get voted off the island. You know,
usurped.
You have to ask yourself, well, why do you think he's the best? Well, he did something great for us. He won this battle, you know, but tomorrow he might lose. Biblical writers aren't thinking that at all. There is no sense that Yahweh could be displaced. You know, so that one doesn't really work either. Monolatry is an academic word, that you worship only one, and that's good, because we do worship only one as believers. But the problem with monolatry is it doesn't say anything about attributes. You know, what biblical writers believe was that there were many Elohim, only one of them is Yahweh. He is unique when it comes to a specific set of attributes. So Yahweh is an Elohim. There's a bunch of those, but no other Elohim is Yahweh.
Yeah.
So I say, look, just describe what it is you believe. Just describe what a biblical writer would believe about the uniqueness of Yahweh and the God of Israel. Don't try to stick a label on it, because the label is not going to work somewhere in the discussion. While I do think it's important to have precision, and we'll talk a little bit about why. You know, it's not like, you know, your eternal destiny, you know, hangs on this sort of thing. I mean, you can get the clarity of the gospel, you can get the basics of the Christian faith just fine, but there are going to be places and things you encounter, especially in apologetics, where knowing what's going on in the text is actually going to matter. So what I try to do in the Angels book to sort of lead off here is the first chapter is about terminology, because we have a significant disconnect in our terminology. There are lots of terms that both Testaments use, but more so the Old Testament for members of the heavenly host, you know, than we do. I mean, the way we're raised is sort of like, okay, the white hats are angels, the black hats are demons, we got Satan, we got God, and now we're all done, and you know, merrily we go on our way. It's just a whole lot more complex than that. So what I do in the first chapter is I explain, look, there's three categories. I call them buckets. There's three buckets that terminology fits in. You have terms used of the heavenly host that tell you what a thing is, what a member is. Again, the academic word for this is ontology. There are ontological terms, spirits, ruchot, okay, that you're a spirit being. It's what you are by nature, okay? Then there's another bucket that's really about status and hierarchy. We have to realize, again, that a lot of the terminology, just generally for the heavenly host, is drawn from the royal court. You know, the king. Well, God is king, and he has a bureaucracy too, and he's got princes. Look at the terminology. He's got sons, you know, he's got a family, he's got servants. You know. So we have to realize that this is the same things going on over in the spiritual world, that God is having the writers use vocabulary that's familiar to them, not only to describe what they are, but where they rank. So sons of God is one of these. Again, in the royal court, every king, you know, had an inner circle, an entourage, largely composed of family members and extended family. Yeah. So, I mean, there you get the idea. They have a different rank in the system, the bureaucracy, than, you know, somebody down here that's doing, you know, some sort of task. Sure. Not a decision maker, but a task. Yeah. Okay. And then the third bucket is this sort of lower level that's really task oriented. Okay. There are terms that the Hebrew Bible will use to describe a function, basically a job description.
So like take an angel.
Angel is in the third bucket.
Okay.
Because the Hebrew word for, angel, malach, it just means messenger. Okay. So that describes a thing that you do, a task. Okay, that's all it is. So not all members of the heavenly host are angels. Yeah. There are only some that have this task, and others are in, you know, the middle tier, and so on and so forth. So I think that's helpful. Again, it's not like essential to the Christian life, just in a broad stroke. But I argue in Unseen Realm and Supernatural that the more you have this stuff in your head, you'll see how it maps over, how it's really a template for how God looks at his earthly family and his earthly help. Okay, you know, I get asked all the time, why does God need a council? Those divine council stuff. Well, he doesn't need it. Sure. He doesn't need it any more than he needs a church. Yeah. It's just that God makes beings like himself to be his partners. Yeah. He's still in command. Sure. Again, it is not a democracy, but God will, you know, watch an employee or a partner do something knowing that they're going to fail, or knowing that that's not the way I told you to do it. And, you know, we'll loop back to you and fix that problem later on. Sure. I mean, it's very fatherly. This is why I think you have multiple metaphors for God and the way he relates to the members of his host. You have family metaphors. You've got these partnering metaphors. They're all important. Yeah. And again, they all map over, you know, to the way God looks at his human family and his human partners, which would be us. So again, there's a lot of stuff that sort of gets hidden or obscured in terms of terminology that we don't often pick up on, either because of translation or we're sort of not sensitized, to do it. I think other than sort of biblical theology helping us to map this thought over to another thought, I think it really helps with apologetics too. And I'll give you an example, like with Mormonism. I mean, there are a lot of Mormons out there who really like my work because I acknowledge the supernatural nature of the Elohim in Psalm 82, and they camp out there.
Okay.
The problem is that in Mormon theology, all the Elohim are basically the same. They don't have attribute distinction. Remember I said a few minutes ago, Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Okay, there's none like him. Okay, that he's different. He's the only omnipotent, the only creator, all this stuff. Yeah. And the other ones are denied those attributes in certain passages, specifically and explicitly. They're not this. But in Mormonism, you don't have that. And this is why in Mormon theology, God and Satan are brothers. Well, because they're both Elohim. Yeah. There's just this leveling that goes on. And so, you need to know things like that when you're having conversations with people who have alternative worldviews or, alternative, belief systems like this. This was before Unseen Realm was published. I got sent something from, somebody, just an email, and said, hey, you need to go over to this forum. There's somebody there defending your view of Psalm 82 and getting beaten up for it. So I went over to this forum, and sure enough, this guy, he's right, and he's getting pounded. And so I just put a little thing in there. Hey, this is what the text says. Just, don't freak out about it. Here's how to parse it. And the next day I got an email from the guy getting beaten up on. He was a professor at BYU.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's a professor. And so we got into a conversation, and I found out, I'm not going to drop any names. Yeah. I'll protect this guy. But I found out that annually he goes to the the theological meetings of the Evangelical Theological Society.
Really?
And I said, why do you do that? You're a Mormon. And this is what he said. Okay, it was both shocking and affirming at the same time. He said, look, because there's very few of us over here in Mormonism that really do biblical studies. We depend on you guys. So he goes every year. And I told him, well, you're in luck this year because I'm going to read a paper on Psalm 82. I'm going to critique Mormonism. He goes, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there. Crazy. And he was. And that led to him. He enjoyed the paper so much. He said it just gave him a lot to think about. Mm-hmm. That is what led to me being published. I'm probably the only evangelical scholar in the world that's been published in a Mormon journal critiquing Mormonism.
That's amazing.
You actually find that on the internet. I mean, I have it archived on my own site, but I have an article that was published in a Mormon source critiquing Mormonism's use of Psalm 82 just because of this guy.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, and the differences are very clear. They didn't fiddle with it at all.
Sure.
But they just wanted the discussion. They just wanted somebody to engage the text. It led to I had a chance to talk to him, about the gospel. We sat down for lunch. I've preached one sermon in the last 15 years, and so it's easy to remember. But I use this as an illustration for that sermon where I took this guy to lunch, and the first question he asked, we asked the Lord's blessing over the food, and he looks at me and he goes, "Well, I'm a Mormon, and you're an evangelical. Am I going to hell?"
Oh, wow. That's a great start.
That's a great start. And I said, look, the answer's the same no matter what label you have.
Yeah.
If you can look me in the eye and say that you are depending exclusively on what Jesus did on the cross, separated from any merit of your own for any reason, if that is your faith, then you're a believer. You're going to have eternal life. And he thought for a little while, and he said, I don't know. I think I could say that, but I'll have to think about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like he thought he could, but and I mean, I know enough about Mormonism to know that they have their own parsings of the terms and all that kind of stuff. But my greater point is it led to a discussion with this guy about the gospel.
Yeah.
So I mean, what better outcome could you want? It's a little disturbing to have a Mormon more open to engaging the text than you do evangelicals. I mean, that was something that's disturbing. After the fact, it's like I just had this conversation with this guy, and we had this relationship develop, and he came to my paper even though I was going to shoot at, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
All this stuff, it's like here this guy is more willing to engage the text than a lot of the people I know at this meeting, who I would agree with theologically on, basically everything. Because some would say well, we can't say that because then we're going to sound like Mormons. Or we can't say that because then we're going to sound like charismatics. Or we're going to sound like, fill in the blank, okay, New Agers or something. So I do think there's an element of overcorrection there, but it is our responsibility to engage the text, because when let's just be real, boots on the ground here. This is the thing that we claim to believe is inspired.
Yes. So
we probably ought to want to exegete the thing, like to pay attention to what it says. It might be worth thinking about that. That's a good thought to think. Why should we be willing to not examine it closely? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I was in that other camp for many years. I had to have my own jolt, by providence. I've described, what happened to me. So I understand that there's a fear factor, not just for, I don't want to sound like a Mormon, or I don't want to sound like a charismatic. It's not just that. It's especially for an academic. There's this sense of, well, if I really affirm that these entities are real, and by the way, what I'm actually saying there is, if I have the same worldview of the biblical writers, like if I actually assign validity to their view of the spiritual world, I'm just not going to sound very enlightened. I'm going to sound like I'm superstitious. I'm not going to sound as intelligent, because we're modern. We don't say it this way, but we know better. Okay. Yeah. We want to sort of have this thought floating around in our heads that we are advanced. We're beyond this primitive stuff. When the reality is, this primitive stuff is acknowledging that there's a spiritual world that, oh, by the way, God lives there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like he's part of that. And somehow it's okay to accept God and Jesus as the deity of, deity incarnate. It's okay to accept these ideas, but if we accept other ideas, then that's somehow either spooky or just a little too, it's very inconsistent. God wants to visit his embodied family, humans. They can't go to where he is. He wants to come where they are. Wow. And where God is, his entourage is, his family, his heavenly family, his heavenly, host. I mean, they are with him. Eden is a lot of things. Eden is the home of God. It is a temple. It is sacred space. All of these ideas that it's more than a garden. There's a reason it's called a garden, because this is where kings and gods lived in the ancient world, because it's paradise. There's a reason why Eden gets called a mountain. Again, the same thing. It's remoteness. It's distinction from humanity. There are these metaphors that are really important to convey the idea, not only that this space is different than that space, your space, but also, in the beginning, humans were right there. Yeah. They were created to be fit for sacred space with his already existing family. And this is why, when you loop around, heaven and earth, join, in the sense that heaven descends to earth again, but on a global scale. Yeah. I mean, there's a logic to all of it, and just how it's bookended.